This is HBR News number 368. Trump's home raided by the FBI, Virginia to protect children from sexual education. I'm putting that in quotes, so not really education, you know. Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. We will be discussing news items this week. This is HBR News. And I am joined by, as always, my co-hosts, Dr. Random McCam, Hannah Wallen, and Mike J. On this week's HBR News show, we're going to be talking about this breaking story of a recent FBI raid on Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. I'm sure that this is going to upset some people in our audience that may have, like, differing political views, let's put it that way. But I really think this is important for many reasons that everyone should be paying attention to. Virginia does it again with a new bill to protect children from sexually explicit forms of education. Jeanette McCurdy of iCarly fame, you guys, you know, some of you younger viewers, maybe you're Zoomers or young millennials, I don't really know what time the show became popular, but you may remember iCarly. It was a Nickelodeon sitcom for teens. Well, one of the actresses opens up about her mother's abuse and more. So stick around, it's going to be a good time. And be sure to join us in the patron-only show. So I was really struggling to find things to talk about in the patron show because this Mar-a-Lago thing with the FBI, it's so upsetting that I haven't been able to find anything else that could be like silly or fun to look at. So I may just spend the after show ranting about it, or you know, maybe someone has something they could donate or we could like talk about. But yeah, to be honest, I don't have anything for the after show right now. I went to The Guardian, I went to the opinion section, I went to, you know, all kinds of other, like, progressive feminist websites where there's usually something that you could find, and I just wasn't feeling any of it. So maybe we'll try again, but it doesn't really matter because the after show or the patron show is just about us hanging out and, you know, just talking about what's on our mind. We frequently go off on tangents anyway, and you know, half the time we don't get very far into the article that we're looking at, especially if it's really long, which a lot of these like feminist articles tend to be really freaking long because they're like their memes, you know, it just goes on for pages. Yeah. So
very often,
long, repetitive, and badly written.
And very often we just talk about food for the first half an hour because it's always a compelling discussion. But this time there's important and desperate stuff to talk about, so we might just talk about that, or we might distract ourselves with something wholesome. You never know. Become a badger at Honey Badger Radio and find out what the hell we're going to talk about in the after show.
As soon as we do.
Hang out with the due process advocates. We have cookies or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So with that said, if you want to be a part of the patron-only show and join the community, please go to feedthebadger.com, set up a monthly subscription. $5 a month will get you into the Discord, where you'll be able to participate in all the additional content, but also the community activities and the community itself. And if you don't want to wake up one morning to find that we have been yeeted from the mainstream internet, please go to badgerfeed.com. That's badgerfeed.com. or honeybadgerradio.com. That's where all of our content lives. So even if you don't see us on YouTube anymore, you know that you can just go to honeybadgerradio.com or badgerfeed.com and you'll see that we're still producing content. If you want to send us a super chat, you can do so through YouTube, or you can send a Rumble rant through Rumble. I always check them between stories. And lastly, if you want to send one where you make sure that we get most of the donation, because YouTube takes about half of whatever you donate, goes to Susan Wojcicki, then go to feedthebadger.com/just the tip, and you can send us a super chow. So, all right, let us now get into the stories. So the first one we got to talk about, and I had to change my layout of stories or my suggested stories when I learned about this, which I didn't learn about until this morning. The FBI raided former President Donald Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida yesterday. This is the first time in history that the FBI raided a home of a former president. According to the Washington Examiner, there is not much known on the FBI's execution of the search warrant. However, it is being widely reported that it concerns the proper handling and retention of classified documents. If this is the case, it would be the same law that Hillary Clinton ran afoul when she maintained a private email server as Secretary of State. The unprecedented use of federal power against the former president, has led to members of the GOP demanding an immediate briefing on the matter, as well as gathered Trump supporters near Mar-a-Lago in protest. And since then, there have also been other protesters, that are they were marching or protesting outside of Trump's hotels in various major cities. I saw a video on New York City most recently.
Lord knows they can't protest outside the Capitol lest they all get thrown in prison without trial for the foreseeable future.
At
least the unforeseeable future.
Right. Representative Mike Turner called for immediate answers and took to social media, writing he remained skeptical about the raid being anything other than politically motivated.
Yeah, so there's an international listing known as the Democracy Index. You may have heard of it. It's a list that assesses each country by several criteria and ranks them from 1 to 167 based on how successfully democratic they are. The top 6 of the list is currently, as it usually is, occupied by all 5 Scandinavian countries and New Zealand. But you didn't hear that from Jacinda Ardern, therefore it isn't true. The United States of America, at the last tally, was listed at number 26. It is a quote-unquote flawed democracy. And in light of recent events, I'm going to have to reevaluate its position. The criteria and updated scores are as follows. Number 1, electoral process and pluralism. Well, we're not permitted to discuss the possible flaws in the most recent electoral process on this platform or just about any platform, most of which are located in Silicon Valley in the great US of A itself. So until that's sorted out, we're going to have to give it a 0 by default. Number 2, functioning of government. Well, to summarize the functioning of the American government, I have one word for you. True national impression. And I guess there are some semi-patterned phonemes in there. Nothing that functions as a word, but it's better than total silence or just running off before anyone can ask you a question. So you can have a 2. Man. Come on, man. Fat. You can have a 2 out of 10, and that's frankly generous. Next, number 3, political participation. I have to give this one a high score. You saw the voter turnout in the last election. Any country in which even the dead people are voting twice for the most popular president in history is surely a country with the highest possible political participation. 11 out of 10. Number 4, political culture. Well, there's a lot of politics, but it's almost entirely contained within fiction. Within the skin suit wearing, burned out husk of cultural suicide that is American fiction. While, ironically, the politicians themselves indulge in nothing but fiction. Right idea, wrong way around. So you have a 3.2 for effort. Last category, civil liberties. Let me see. Not only does a former president get raided by the corrupt special forces of the current regime, but even his supporters are still rotting in prison without trial for supporting him. While every mass media outlet is paid off to tell you nothing but blatant lies and rank hypocrisy, keeping most of the population in the dark as to just what a tragic and embarrassing joke of a banana republic it's become. The country is ruled by an illegitimate regime that actively hates its citizens and will stop at nothing to disenfranchise them and impoverish them and depopulate them. And if they can't get away with censoring anyone who points it out, they'll just redefine words to mean whatever is convenient for them to mean. Exactly like the invented newspeak of a fictional totalitarian dystopia that was supposed to be an exaggeration, but turned out to be an optimistic understatement. Minus 15 out of 10. So overall, that's an average score of 0.24 out of 10. That lands the USA at a rank position of 166 out of 167, just above Canada, whose score has also been recalculated due to recent events. Normally, the lowest category is authoritarian, but we've had to invent a new category just for this purpose, and it's flawed clown world. Such interesting times we live in, ladies and germs upon the earth. Are you paying attention yet?
I hope so. This is quite a situation. One of the most foundational civil rights is the right to due process, the right to not have unlawful search and seizure occur, the right to not have the government do anything against you without already having evidence. And that's been violated in the case of Donald Trump multiple times. And we've been lied to about it multiple times. And then after it was all said and done, and the truth comes out each time, oh, well, we lied to get the warrant. Oh, well, we lied to the public. Oh, the newspapers all lied to you. Oh, we lied to Congress. Oh, most of the people that did the lying are just completely unaccountable. Nobody has gone to jail except for, I think, Comey, who went to jail for other things. I don't think he just went to jail for lying to Congress. So, and the guy that I can't think of his real name. Tucker Carlson calls him creepy porn lawyer, but I hate that.
Michael
Avenatti.
Yeah.
He went to jail, but he didn't go to jail for lying to the public. He went to jail for trying to blackmail a company that does business in China.
Naive.
And yes, and he went to jail for lying to his client. And I think for not getting Donald Trump. And that's it. Like, nobody has been convicted of lying to any kind of process crime for the lies that were told to obtain warrants, to excuse processes, to excuse 2 failed coup attempts that they referred to as impeachments. None of that, right? Just the only people that have been accused of lying are people that couldn't remember accurately what was in one email 5 years ago or whatever, when they were being grilled by the FBI. And that's basically why at this point, when we see people saying on Twitter or Facebook or any other social media, well, this time, a judge signed off on it, and therefore there must have been some kind of evidence. It's got to be credible. A judge signed off on it. I'm sorry, but I'm pressing X out, and then I find out, oh, hey, it's the judge that was so nice to Jeffrey Epstein. Like, that totally makes it that much more credible. I mean, we're going to drown in corruption, guys. We're just going to drown in corruption. Can it get any dirtier?
Well, and like, at what point are people going to, like, look, there are Trump supporters that are speaking out, they're outraged, they're protesting, they're at, places across the country, and they're occupying them, and they're making noise, and that is great. But it shouldn't have to be Trump supporters doing that. It should be everyone. But obviously, there are still people who are afraid, who want to believe that what the FBI did is just or right somehow. You know, the media is telling them this or that. They've redefined the word raid to mean something else because that's what they do. And people are, they appear to be too afraid to come across as extreme or divisive. And this is really frustrating because there's just right and wrong. There's just right and wrong. And if you can't tell that somebody is wrong here and somebody is right here, and then you have to side with the person that's right, regardless of how popular that position might be, because that means nothing. You know, you could be the one person on earth that's right about something, and it doesn't mean you're wrong just because more people believe the wrong thing. But they won't do it, or they try to like do this crazy middle ground compromise. Where's the middle ground between this? Like what does, describe it, please. Tell me, what does that look like? Because the FBI, and here's the thing too, what they did to him, they will and can do to you. And so when it happens to you and you haven't said anything because you were afraid to be divisive and support the due process and human rights of the Orange Man, which is what I think people are doing, right? Well, then you get what you deserve because you didn't speak up. You know, like I mean, for me, it's really simple. Like, this is not acceptable. It's just like Hannah said, we're drowning in corruption. It's really obvious. Like, they're not hiding anything. And like, you know, there are still people that are going to try and rationalize this. And they're going to be like, oh, well, you know, there's probably like a good reason. And then, you know, things are just going to get worse because they don't have any balls. Because they don't have the balls to say what needs to be said. And they're worried about being associated with a guy who has been mean to people who deserve it on Twitter. And they think that it's more important to maintain civility than side with what is true, what is right. Okay? And that's cowardice. That's cowardice to me. And people need to be vocal. Like, get your shit together. Anyway. You know, it's really not surprising because I knew that at some point, you know, they were going to try something like this. And what I find kind of amazing about it is that despite every single attempt, they've actually been able to come up with no evidence. Like, this guy, he's actually very clean so far, right? And what amazes me too is that people are so shocked by the fact that he appears to be squeaky clean because there is an assumption that anyone who is rich and successful couldn't possibly have done that fairly. And they must have done like really unethical or even illegal things to get there. And yet here's a guy who they can't find anything on at all. They have tried multiple times to do it, and he's a billionaire, and nothing's coming out, and there are still people thinking, holy crap, he must be really good at hiding that dirty laundry. Or maybe he doesn't have any. Maybe like you have been conditioned to hate businessmen so much that you're ready to assume whatever the worst possible thing is, and meanwhile you're being told that you can trust politicians. Think about that. Who's telling you that? Why do you have those assumptions? So I don't know, like, it just, you know, it reminds me of like when I stood up and I spoke out in support of Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and Johnny Depp when they were accused. And I said, whoa, wait a minute, you know, we can't assume anything, even if we really don't like these people, right? You can't do that. It's extremely dangerous to essentially allow your biases to like just take away somebody's rights. And so you should always be calling for, due process to be done and for people to look at the evidence and make a decision based on that. And it doesn't matter if you like the guy or not, because if you don't advocate for all men, you don't advocate for any men. So you can't pick and choose based on what you, who you like and who you don't like. So I'm just saying, like, if you allow this precedent to be set and you play this middle ground crap when it's obvious that what the Democrats and the FBI and leftists are doing is it's not rational, it's not reasonable, it's just about power and it's about destroying their opponents. There's no middle ground there. They don't compromise. There's no such thing. It's their fault. Like, this isn't right versus left. This is leftist versus everybody else. Everybody else. So, like, wake up and fight back. Don't allow this to happen, because it will happen to you. And it doesn't matter, like, how, even if you consider yourself to be, like, let's say you consider yourself to be more on their side in some ways, right? It doesn't matter. They're going to come after you, because if you don't toe the line and pass the purity test, you're done. Look at, J.K. Rowling, for example. She's basically an enemy to them. It doesn't matter that she agrees with most of their politics and their views on feminism and all that, because there's one thing that she wanted to draw the line at, and they were like, nope, I'm not allowed. So how do you compromise with people like that? There is no compromising with it. The ideology is made that way. It's baked in, right? It's the intention. So I just need, people need to wake up. Just if you think that what's happening is unjust, it doesn't matter who it's happening to. You just say what is true, and you defend what is right. Because anything that, even if it happens to someone that you think is an enemy, like if I heard that Ghazi Kodzo or whatever was, like, put in prison without trial and there was no investigation, I'd be defending him, even though I think he's a, radical cult leader piece of shit. But that doesn't matter. Like that, because he deserves the same human decency and the human rights that everyone else does. So, like, it just kind of, like, it's so exhausting, because everyone's constantly trying to figure out ways to either distance themselves from or attack the personality of people who it's very, very safe to criticize. People like Trump, but not limited to him, for example. And all of a sudden, all of these things become a little bit more permissible. Because, like, if they just assassinated him, like if they went to wherever he was and there was an assassination, he was just dead, right? Obviously it would make the news, but there would be people that'd be like, well, he shouldn't have been so mean on Twitter. There's crazy people out there, and they would just forgive it. And that's like, That's not off the table. Like, that's not off the table. It's not that radical a notion. So, I don't know.
And there were people on Twitter celebrating this. That I'm sitting there thinking, imagine for a minute if the cops came and knocked on your door one day, and you had to let them in. You weren't allowed to tell them they couldn't come into your home without a warrant. Imagine if they came to your door one day and said, we just want to look around your home, see if you've committed any crimes recently, right? Or if they could show up with a warrant that was obtained without evidence, which a lot of warrants these days are pretty much just signed off on. They're just rubber stamped. So this problem already, like this, the problem predates Trump. Trump's getting affected by it. Politicians are usually kind of immune unless other politicians are mad at them, but you're not. And so they come into your house, look around, they leave. They didn't find anything, but they come back several weeks later and do it again because in all the pictures they took and everything, they saw something that they wanted to take a second look at. Do you think that would be fair? especially if it turns out that the thing they were looking for, that they said they were looking for, was definitely not there. You're looking at a very, very corrupt process. And that's basically why I got involved with the online men's rights movement. Right? That's why I got involved with the men's rights subreddit, was talking about a case in which my friend's due process rights were egregiously violated. His ex-wife would go lie about him to the court, and a restraining order would be put on him. And there would be a whole bunch of restrictions put on him that you don't get rid of having had that imposed on you very easily. Then you got to go to court. You got to go prove that you don't need a restraining order, that there's no reason for you to be restricted from presence of this person that has lied about you, and that you're not a danger to anybody. And of course, you don't have a right to a speedy trial necessarily in this case. Again, I found that out because she was able to use continuances. She stretched a 30-day temporary emergency restraining order into a year. All right, not just a couple of continuances, but every month a new continuance. And every time the reason was different. And she went false allegation after false allegation, lied to police, filed false complaints, perjured herself, actually manufactured false evidence. At one point, she came in with a tape that she said was an answering machine tape of a message that he left, and it was quite obviously with a different accent than the local accent, somebody that was not from around here and was not the same race as the guy she was accusing. And no prosecution, nothing. Can't prosecute her because she's alleging abuse, right? And we can't fix that if we accept any due process violations. We cannot protect men from women who lie in custody cases to try to get men jailed to keep them away from their children, if we do not protect the due process rights of every citizen in this country. And if the United States falls, if we don't have due process rights anymore, if you don't have due process rights, you don't have any other right, because false allegations of criminal activity can be used to take every right away from you. And if we fall, there's no place left. No place else is going to have a better system. Every place is going to, the due process didn't work in the U.S., so we don't have to have it here either. Yep. That's what's going to happen. So if you want the ability to fight for your rights, if you want the ability to fight for due process rights, for fathers' rights, for, all of the different things, your bodily autonomy rights, the right to prosecute your abuser, the right to prosecute your rapist, then you better be on board with everybody having due process rights. This situation is really bad. This is basically, we could joke about this because I see this as Trump being the Pink Panther, just wandering through the construction site, right? And everything he does screws up the establishment, and they're mad and they're trying to get him. And every time they try to attack him, they run into each other instead, and he just walks off scot-free because he hasn't done anything bad. So he's not. They can't get him for anything. But eventually, if they get more and more bold about manufacturing a crime and manufacturing evidence and show trials and all that, they will go after him with something that's completely fake. That's, everybody can look at it and say, well, this is bullshit, and we know it's bullshit, that he can't lose this, and he will. If that happens, y'all should be scared as hell. This should scare the shit out of you.
Like, think of how scary the Holocaust was, but at least the Untermensch who lived in Germany, the Untermensch who lived in Poland, the Untermensch who lived in Austria, the Untermensch who lived in France, they had, at least some of them had the option of hopping on a boat and going to the New World, escaping to the New World, particularly the good old US of A, where they could start a new life without fear of being persecuted just for being who they are or just for having the beliefs they have. Where does anyone go from this? Where is anyone supposed to escape to from this? There's nowhere. This is not just national socialism. This is global socialism. You've either got to escape to the hills and live off the land, or no, there is no war. You have to get off the grid, or stand
and pray,
and fight,
and pray that if you get off the grid, you have to pray that they don't find you, because
and they will.
You know,
so you just got to stand and fight. There's no other option.
They're already making it illegal to go off the grid. It's not yet. But they're doing things like in certain areas, it's illegal to, use water without it being through the city water system. You can't collect rainwater and purify it yourself, even if you have a good purification system. You can't even collect rainwater to water your garden, unless it falls on your garden directly. Like rain barrels are illegal in some places. It is illegal to go off on dependence of local utilities and stuff in some places. So if they can do that, they can make it illegal. Cities can actually stop you from gardening, growing food in your front yard, and in some places they can stop you from growing it in your backyard. So if they can do that, they can go after you for living someplace that you're hard to find and living someplace where you're not dependent on services from the state. It's not that hard. Any law can be passed. Any law can be passed. Yep. And especially if they are ignoring the Constitution.
Yeah, I guess, if I don't know. I was gonna add something, but I'm just so, upset because if people are in a position where they have to fight back, and they probably will be in that position, there will be people saying that adds to the division in the country. And I'm just so sick of that, at what point do we recognize that we're up against people who hate us and they think that we need to be serfs and that, we shouldn't have rights and that we shouldn't own property and that we should essentially spend the rest of our lives serving them or their interests or whatever, and that fighting back against that is not creating more division. It is literally fighting back against tyranny. So, I was gonna add something else. Oh yeah, right. Well, it's also kind of hard to talk about the ways that men are disadvantaged in society, both legally, politically, and culturally and socially, if there is no society and they're just taking everything away from us. So this is another reason why, for me, I think that you can't ignore the kind of shit going on, and it's not just this country. I mean, this particular instance is, but I'm sure that in your respective countries, if you're not American, you have your own shit to deal with from your own government, because most of these governments are working together and they're working in unison and they're moving towards a certain goal, and they don't care that you don't like it. I mean, you think it's an accident that there are trucker protests in Canada, farmer protests in in like the Dutch countries.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not an accident. Like these things are happening at the same time because it's the same engine. And so,
but you'll notice you don't have any nurse protests or teacher protests. As a matter of fact, we're all encouraged to worship the teachers and the nurses. It just so happens that those are the two jobs that are mostly occupied by women.
yeah, just so happens.
Although we're not encouraged to worship the nurses that are refusing certain medical treatments. They get fired.
Then they're not nurses, Hannah, because they don't believe in the science.
Yeah, then they're not nurses anymore.
Yeah,
right.
you gotta believe in the science.
They're not
otherwise
nurses because they're fired.
Yeah, they're also not nurses because they're fired. All right, but anyway.
But that has nothing to do with why there are shortages of workers in healthcare right now.
Oh, no.
Just nothing at all.
That's the fault of oil companies and corporations and evil rich people. That's who's to blame, you know? So, and we all know that all rich people are all evil all the time. So, all right, Meredith G gives us $5 and says, the reason you protect the rights of the people you hate is because the next person to lose their rights will be you. Yes, and they use this, like they basically like make a figure extremely easy to hate, and then they violate that person's rights. And if you don't say anything, then they basically, you've given them precedent to do it again. And maybe next time it won't be someone that you hate. So maybe you should, again, on principle, defend people because they're people and because it's right, not because you like them. That's not how this works. That's high school teenage girl bullshit. Don't do it. Grow up. Senior Sticks gives us $2 and says, Dr. Ranabacam, who in the top 25 of most Democratic? I don't know. Do you have a list, Mike, or were you just kind of...
I do. I mean, it's Norway, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden, Iceland, Denmark, Ireland, Taiwan, Australia, Switzerland, Netherlands, Canada, Uruguay, Luxembourg, Germany, South Korea, Japan, United Kingdom, Mauritius, Austria, Costa Rica, France, Israel, Spain, Chile. That's the top 25. United States is 26.
Well,
that's interesting.
Remember, though, that they're saying top democratic countries. That doesn't necessarily mean they're the freest or that they have like other.
You cannot possibly trust this list. This is just a list of the most leftist governments, basically.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's the list of the most democratic, but democratic simply means mob rule. It is two wolves and a chicken deciding what they're going to have for dinner. So that doesn't mean that it's a good setup. They just frame it that way because democracy sounds nice, but it's not nice. So, bear that in mind. Don't let people measure the worth of a country based on how democratic it is, because that doesn't really mean anything. It's actually, all you have to do is change like the hearts and minds of the people who live in that country to be like a lot worse, and all of a sudden the country changes to something a lot worse because everything's decided by majority rule. So,
and what we've seen in the last few years is that you can lie to a lot of the people a lot of the time, and it can become blatantly obvious that you're lying to a lot of the people a lot of the time. But if you happen to be the establishment media and you happen to be the establishment politicians, and there's a few billionaires funding your efforts, it'll work, and they'll buy everything that you say, no matter how ridiculous, and they'll get so emotionally invested in it that when they're proved wrong, they'll actually engage in all kinds of mental gymnastics to adhere to the things that you told them were true, and they'll do whatever you want. Democracy really is the worst system of government, except for all the other systems of government. And for everybody that's sort of ragged on me for coming out as ANCAP, this is what an out of control government looks like. Would you like to face down both of its barrels? Because I don't want to.
Well, there you go. All right, well, let us know what you guys think about this story in the comments. Do you think this sets a very, very dangerous precedent? Do you think that the feds could have or may try to plant something? Because there is talk about, when they raided, they could have planted something and then used it against Trump, because the goal is to basically make sure he can't run in 2024. And so if they can do that, then it would, I guess their hope is that he won't be able to run again, because they really don't want him to run again. And I think that it's entirely, plausible that they might try to do that. So, and the thing is that, like, if they did, or even if they didn't, let's say they actually just found something, or they claim to have found something, I think that all of Trump's supporters will not believe them anyway. And the reason for that isn't because they're like brain dead, like, cult members. It's because the FBI and the media and the politicians have been lying to us for so long that there's nothing they could possibly say that will make us believe it again. So, unless there's like really irrefutable proof that it wasn't planted, most people are going to believe that it was. So it almost doesn't matter, right? Because it's not going to change the minds of people who are intent on supporting Trump. And I think that is only going to further sort of like, show that it's because they've lied so much that this has been a problem. And by the way, I think that, lying to people, that should probably be more severely condemned than it is. I think too many people are like forgiving of that kind of behavior, and it's not right, So anyway, let us know what you guys think about this in the comments. We got to move on to the next story, because I feel like I spent maybe a little too much time on this one, but it's a big one, and it's very upsetting. So let's talk about some good news. I think it's good news. Another win for Virginia. So Mike J, I'm going to hand it to you.
So, Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin signed a bill in April requiring all school districts to give parents advance notice about any lesson or lessons that include content deemed sexually explicit. The law, which is expected to go into effect in January, mandates that schools post all sexually explicit lessons and materials online on the school's websites for parents to screen. Additionally, parents will be notified 30 days before the lesson is planned to take place. Virginia's chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, is not happy with the new bill. In a letter sent to the Virginia Department of Education, they state, quote, "As drafted, the proposed model policies codify and force all Virginia school districts to adopt this anti-free speech practice."
Oh, for fuck's sake.
And will only exacerbate an alarming trend towards classroom censorship, all while denying students the opportunity to be inspired by stories of people from all walks of life trying to live authentically in school curriculum.
Okay, as obviously exaggerated as it is, I think it's worth addressing this charge of, quote, the policies force all Virginia school districts to adopt this anti-free speech policy. The force they're talking about is not a violent force or even an implied violent force, such as in the armed forces or the police force. It's the force of, sort of conditionality. It's if you don't follow these rules, then you don't get to be here. You can call it force, you can call it compulsion, you can call it coercion, if you like, but whatever it is what schools do. By the very virtue and function of what schools are, they don't physically lock the children inside the building. But pray tell what happens if the children leave the building before they're allowed to? What happens if they don't turn up in the first place? What if they make a habit of not being in that allotted room in that allotted building when they're supposed to be there? They get punished. And the punishment is not being allowed in the building anymore, which is kind of ironic in all sorts of ways. But the point is, the schools are in the business of organizing children into a captive audience. Whatever a child learns in school, they are essentially being forced to learn it on pain of the termination of their education. In the same way that whatever teachers teach their students, they are being forced to teach it by their superiors and by the assigned curriculum on pain of the termination of their employment. That's certainly how it's supposed to work. So as teachers and as a school board, you don't get to complain that you're under the constraints of some kind of bureaucratic force. Why wouldn't you be? You're part of a chain of command. The children do what you say, you do what the government says, and the government does what the voters say. Again, that's how it's supposed to work. If you're trying to break this chain off at the point at which you're beholden to anyone, you're the one letting your megalomania get in the way of the system. Needless to say, the system isn't perfect. Maybe the system doesn't need to exist at all. Maybe children can get their education in a way that doesn't involve them being locked in a room and obeying the commands of anyone but their parents. That sounds like an intriguing idea to me. But as long as this school system exists and you exist within it, you don't get to act as though it should apply to everyone but you. Same goes for you, government. If we have to obey you, then you have to obey us. At least somewhere along the line, the parents should have some kind of say in what's going on with their kids. And if you're, quote unquote, forcing children to stay in a room while you gossip to them about the gay orgy you had last night and the 5 different strains of monkeypox you contracted, then the parents of those children should have every right to be in the loop as to what you're doing there, and they should have the right to, yes, force you to let them in on the loop. Get with the program, or shit off the pot, whatever.
You know, part of the reason that it's ridiculous for the ACLU to call this anti-free speech is because a lot of these lessons involve compelled speech. And it's been long established in the United States that compelled speech is not free speech. Like, I cannot be forced to say anything. And your child cannot be forced to pray in school. They can't be suspended for refusing to join in with a prayer. In fact, there have been people who have fought tooth and nail to make sure that your child doesn't even have to see or hear anybody else pray in school. So compelled speech has been long established to be anti-free speech, right? But not in our schools. In our schools, our children are now being told a new version of the English language in which there are a multitude of ways to identify a person and a multitude of ways to use pronouns, and all of them are valid, and they have to respect and use all of them regardless of any beliefs they might have about them, and regardless of whether it violates their moral and ethical codes that their families have and that they've developed as they're growing up. And these policies that these kids are subject to are not just about teaching kids to be able to get along with other people regardless of who they are and how they live. And it's not just about protecting kids who are different from being abused in any given situation. It is actually about denying kids access to objective reality. You cannot have objective reality in the same curriculum in which you are telling kids that they can identify as anything they want, and without changing anything about themselves to make themselves anything like that. Everyone must acknowledge that that's what they are, and you can't change it. You can't deny it. You can't acknowledge objective reality. So, yeah, this is much more than just about free speech. That's the first thing. The second thing is your right to free speech under the Constitution protects your right to political protest. It protects your right to your religious practices, and it protects your right to gather together in groups to practice these things. It does not provide you with a right to override parents and to influence their children in ways that the parents find dangerous to the children. As a school teacher, you do not have free speech rights. Not in terms of when it comes to what you're telling people's children and how you are influencing them, right? That's not your political protest platform. It's somebody's child. It's a developing young mind. And you don't have the right to use woke conversion therapy as a recruitment method for your political group just because you use the phrase free speech. It means when you do that you do not understand free speech. And it is profoundly disturbing to hear the ACLU fail at understanding free speech.
Or choosing to misinterpret it because it's not that they're dumb, it's that they, for whatever reason, want to encourage teachers to essentially indoctrinate students into queer orthodoxy.
Yeah, basically.
I mean because like the ACLU is not dumb. They know what they're doing, and they want this. They support this like openly, right? They're using the free speech argument as a means to get people to side with them because people in general agree with the notion or the sentiment of free speech. But they also must know that it just does not apply. I mean, public school teachers are agents of the state. So they are the state. They're, I don't think that protects them. Because the state is not supposed to be encouraging certain kinds of speech, which is what this education is made for. So they're essentially engaging in compelled speech from the state. That's where it's coming from. So that's not free speech. And James Lindsay, he's like one of the grievance studies professors, along with Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian.
R.I.P. by the way.
Yeah, R.I.P. James Lindsay, shot in the head by Twitter. Well, he was basically permanently banned from Twitter, I think yesterday or the day before or something.
Yeah, a couple days ago.
Yeah, he was permanently banned from Twitter because he called someone the G word, which apparently you can't say anymore. And he's been fighting this fight for essentially to save our kids from these conversion therapy psychos that work in the schools and all these other places. And of course they have the backing of organizations like the SPLC, the ACLU, Citizens United, ADL, all of those organizations stand behind them, and they protect them, and they run cover for them. And he was, I meant to mention this in case you guys didn't know. Yeah, he was permanently banned from Twitter. And I think it just shows that what we're dealing with is an overwhelming amount of power being exercised by a small number of people. I maintain that there aren't that many progressives, but that progressives have a tremendous amount of influence. They're running like the tops of most of our institutions. They're heavily involved in big tech and Silicon Valley. They're heavily involved in our entertainment and our academia, but they're not reflective of the average person, right? They're fringe.
Right.
They're a fringe group, but they have a lot of power, and because they have this ability to make their views appear to be the norm. Because, you know, if you turn on the news and they just tell you, like, you know, drag queen story hour is a good thing, and then you turn on a TV show and it has a scene with drag queen story hour and it's like a good thing and a normal thing, and then you go over to this other place and they're showing you the same thing, you're going to start to think that, oh yeah, I guess this is normal. I guess this is normal now. And you won't question it. And if someone does, what do they do to that person? Well, they frame them as like the worst kind of person they can come up with, which is why so many people have been lumped in, you know, as Nazis, because it's the worst thing, because they've been telling us that they're the worst thing on earth for like 100 years. So why wouldn't you use that label on people if you want to make sure that other people don't listen to them or what they have to say? And of course, like, this is all in the with the goal to essentially prevent people from thinking. Because if you are afraid to be associated with someone you've been told is a terrible person, then you might not talk to them. You might avoid them. You might not follow them on social media or whatever. And that would mean that you may never have like notions that have been implanted in you challenged by people who are willing to do it, which is the only way you can think, is to basically talk about stuff. And of course, they don't want that. So if nobody talks about it, then, or people get silenced, like James Lindsay was banned from Twitter, for example, then no one talks about it. Then their main narrative, their you know, large, low resolution idea about the relationship between people in every aspect continues unabated, unchallenged. And of course, you know, the normies they're not likely to question it. They'd probably be open to hearing a different perspective, but in general, they're not going to seek it out. And things are just going to keep moving forward. This is why, like, we're all operating under the feminist paradigm. We're operating within even people who claim to be anti-feminist, even people who claim to, you know, believe that there is like a natural hierarchy between men and women. Even people who claim to be, you know, like red-pilled in other ways, they will accept the paradigm that they're living under as normal, even if they think that they're not doing that. They think that they're rebelling against it. And the reason is because they're not having the kinds of conversations, which means they're not thinking, because without conversation, you're not thinking, you know, you're just internalizing your own ideas. And that's it. That's not thinking. If you're not engaged in conversation with people who have views that are very different from yours, and they may have a good argument, they may not, but that doesn't really matter, because then you're engaged in thought, then you can come to different conclusions, and this is what they don't want. So by saying that, you know, Virginia requires schools to alert parents of sexually explicit content in the classroom, for example, they're basically saying that parents should be involved in what their children learn from the state, and that those parents should, you know, if they don't like it, they should be allowed to speak out. And if the teachers think that they're being like conservative or anti-gay or homophobic or whatever, well, too bad. This is a free country. People can feel that way if they want. I don't care if they're like out and out, like super homophobes that think that being gay is a sin and they're going to go to hell. As long as they're not hurting anyone, I don't care that they feel that way. But they do have a right as parents to, you know, look at and be critical of that which is being taught to their children. So, like, frankly, the bigotry accusation, it doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't work on me. I don't care about it. It's not important. All I care about is, are you violating people's rights or not? Because that's the only thing that matters. And you know, that's just what I think. So the other thing is, I don't know that this is even going to have that much of an impact, because it's nice that parents can be involved. But the thing is, though, as someone who's done teaching, I've done substitute teaching here in Virginia. There is a downside to this. It's like this fight is kind of starting the story in the middle, because most, well, I don't know if it's most, but in cities like Richmond, for example, and a lot of other big cities, this is a problem across like large cities. There is a massive problem with single motherhood, right? There are no fathers around. Men or fathers have been excluded from the home for various incentives to do so. And so you have children growing up in broken families, and they're being sent to school as a means of daycare. So what does that mean? If you're a single mom and you just want your kids in school because then they're out of your hair, because you have essentially created the conditions that makes parenting nearly unbearable, because there isn't a father around to help out, because you have kicked him out, or you've excluded him, or he ghosted you, which is entirely possible too, then you have essentially created the conditions where
you don't know who he is.
Oh yeah, or you don't know who he is, which essentially creates the condition where you are using school not as a means by which to educate your children, to better prepare them for later in life, but because you want them out of your hair for 5 hours or however long. And that means that those parents are probably not going to be heavily invested or involved in what their child is learning, because they either don't have time because they might have a job or something, or they don't have interest because they just want to trust that the system is going to work as intended and that their child is going to be fine as long as they come home alive, you know, that there's no issue. And so the I guess what I'm saying is, it's nice that they're doing this, but this isn't really going to fix the problem, because it's those children who are coming from broken homes, who may have been beaten one too many times by their mom because she's frustrated with them, who have been exploited in some way. Maybe they've even been assaulted or sexually abused by friends of the mom, or boyfriends, or family members, aunts, whatever. Those kids are actually the ones that are most likely to be converted by this queer theory stuff. So because they're going to be looking for answers to questions of why they were abused, why is their life so bad? And because the mom isn't like doing her part to raise a decent, well-rounded child, and essentially like either staying with the father or being a little bit more selective about who they spread their legs for, so that, you know, they have a quality man in their life, they're essentially creating the conditions for this. So, and then of course, if those children go to a school and that school teaches queer theory, which by the way, they don't like, have you ever noticed that when teachers are confronted about teaching children about critical race theory and queer theory, they always say, no, we're not doing that? What they're technically saying is they're not teaching children the actual literature of queer theory, like, you know, Gail Rubin or whatever, and they're not reading, you know, like Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility or whatever it's called to the kids. They're not doing that, but they're teaching things, and they're putting it through the lens of feminism, queer theory, and critical race theory. So that
they are using lesson plans that are informed by queer theory,
that are designed,
and feminist theory,
exactly.
Right?
Why they can make it about any class. So like it could be math, and then they'll just say, you know, the average man makes this much money, and the average woman makes this much money, you know, and then obviously the women's amount is lower, and then they get to teach you about math to a degree, but they're really teaching you about feminism, right? So and that's the actual method that they're using. to essentially, that's why they can make that denial. So if you're going to accuse, you have to be specific and say you're using critical race theory, queer theory, and feminism and these other like radical ideas as a lens through which you teach children regular things, and then you sort of include that, right? So you might like teach them about the time of slavery and not add any additional context, not talk about like the history of slavery throughout human history, and you only talk about it happening in America with white people, for example. And of course that leaves so much out that it can traumatize kids because they live here. So, and that's what they want. So anyway,
and it's not even really new, because I can remember a time when I had teachers teaching about the Underground Railroad, but they didn't teach about any of the white people that were involved with the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, this is exactly right. It's been going on for a long time.
So it's been going on for a long time. And you look at what's going on here, and, let's put on our tinfoil hats for a minute, right? So in the moment when the former president of the United States had been teasing and was about to announce his candidacy, and in the moment when one of the issues that he made clear was going to be part of his platform was putting a stop to this sexualization of children throughout the national education system, in the moment when everybody knows that, he may bring back Betsy DeVos or bring in another Betsy DeVos to fundamentally change the way the education system is run in the United States, and maybe even open up school choice, the judge that was so nice to Jeffrey Epstein, whose clients have not been prosecuted, haven't even been openly pursued by our great Justice Department, signed a warrant to allow the FBI to raid this president's home and business in the hopes of ending his candidacy. It just seems a little weird. I don't have a specific hypothesis there as to what exactly is going on. It's just kind of weird that all of this is happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And just gotta say, and in terms of the sexualization of children in U.S. schools and the LGBTQ movement and the left-right politics conflict and communism versus libertarianism and everything, the Lavender Lad movement didn't kill itself.
Also, there's the oh shit, I forgot what I was gonna say.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's my fault. Anyway, we'll move on. I'm sorry that I forgot what I was gonna add, but we'll move on. Let us know what you guys think about this one in the comments.
It might occur to you later anyway.
Yeah, it might occur to me later. Let us know what you guys think about this one in the comments. So, I'm going to read, I got one super chat from Meredith G. She gives us $5 and she says, public schools teachers don't have a right to free speech in their curriculums because the teachers are an extension of the state. Thank you, Meredith. Yes, very true. Appreciate that. And I think that really matters. Remember that the people who are whining the most about free speech in this instance, they would be absolutely fine with censoring you. So it's all very selective. They don't believe in it in principle. And the ACLU, like those guys, they love to cancel people. They love to deplatform. They love to kick people off of social media. So yeah, no thanks. I won't be listening to your thoughts on that. Okay. So let us move on to the next story. This is okay. So I gotta say, in full disclosure, this is old, but I still thought it was worth talking about because I don't think we've talked about this. I'm fairly certain we haven't, simply because what it's about. So I think it's worth bringing up. So this is speaking of essentially abusive mothers. And one of the reasons why I just want to, explain, one of the reasons why I tend to choose stories about abusive parents that are mothers is because there is a cultural notion about parental abuse always coming from fathers or stepfathers. And this is like a cliche that is used, in our media. It's in our news because it's about like who the media chooses to report on and what incidents essentially like rise up and become more viral or more promoted, and they usually involve men. But there are plenty of women who abuse their children, and in fact, as I was saying before with the the Virginia thing, many of them are single parent homes with mothers in them, because single father homes are very rare. And so we may not even have enough data to be able to even look at how rampant abuse might be in a single father home, although I have my doubts, because it like I said, men are they have no rights when it comes to parenting. They have no recourse. All they can do is ask permission to see their kids, and they have to jump through tremendous amount of hoops to be involved, whereas we presume that women are fit by default. So what that does is that it creates more incidents and opportunities for abusive women to abuse their kids. And the fact that we generally don't recognize this as a problem, I think it's not something that needs to be put forward and people need to be made aware of the ways that women can also be evil to their children, to other men, to their community, whatever. So women as a potentially destructive force needs to be looked at, and it needs to be talked about, okay? So that's why, because most people don't want to accept that that's even possible. So Jeanette McCurdy, some of you people, I don't know when this show was big, but there's a show called iCarly. It was on Nickelodeon, I think, and it was like a sitcom for teenagers. And there was a character, or a woman on the show named Jeanette McCurdy, and she has opened up about her mother's abuse. So Jeanette McCurdy is a 29-year-old actor widely known for her role as Sam Puckett in the popular Nickelodeon show iCarly. Has anyone on this panel ever seen iCarly or know anything about it?
I've seen parts of it because I got kids, and my kids watched little bits here and there. It wasn't something that was incredibly popular with them, but I've seen it. And her character was her character was cute and funny, teenager, and she was I think somebody else described that from the show described her as the person in the room that's making everybody laugh, and I had a comment about that on Twitter. But it was this was a fun, innocent show. It was actually pretty good.
Yeah, it was a kid. It was like a young tween show, from what I can tell, and pretty wholesome. Although I don't know if wasn't there like some producer on the show that was kind of creeping on girls, or am I thinking about a different
yes, it was Dan Schneider, who had a lot of very unpleasant rumors associated with him.
That's what I thought. So that actually kind of
someone who is actually brought up in this this thing of hers that I don't think she ever actually named. She just keeps referencing someone called the Creator, and a lot of people are surmising that maybe Schneider.
Oh, that's weird. All right. So yeah. So this is. It sounds awful, because imagine being a girl on this show with all of the creepy behind the scenes shit that was going on, and going home to your mom. so let's read the rest of this. So she played Sam Puckett in the popular Nickelodeon show iCarly after her mother passed from cancer in 2013. She did extensive therapy and recovered from an eating disorder. In 2019, McCurdy started opening up about her relationship with her mother. In a Huffington Post personal piece, she wrote that her disordered eating began at age 11. Her mother would compare her body to those of other girls, portion out my meals for me, and help me count calories. At the time, she says she wasn't bothered by her mom's suggestions and thought that, quote, that she was actually helping me, end quote, stay thin so that she could get acting roles. In one story, McCurdy said that when her mom was driving her home from a dance class, she told her that, quote, Angelica's mom is really concerned about your weight. She said she brought it up to the other dance moms and they are all worried you're too thin. They're thinking about calling to get you help. If anybody asks, just tell them you're eating normally, she directed. McCurdy's mom also insisted on performing vaginal and breast exams on her daughter. Pause for effect. Until she was.
If you've ever seen Sybil, the movie Sybil, that's a familiar tactic of some types of female abusers.
Yeah. So she insisted on performing vaginal and breast exams on her daughter until she was 17. 17. And, quote, never let her daughter shower alone, end quote.
There's the red flags. You went full Biden, lady. You never go full Biden. Sorry, carry on.
Oh my goodness. Okay. McCurdy described her childhood to People magazine as heaviness and chaos due to her mom's emotions that were so erratic that it was like walking a tightrope every day. My mom has always dreamt of being a famous actor, and she became obsessed with making me a star, said McCurdy, adding, I felt like my job was to keep the peace, and I wanted to make my mom happy, end quote. This sounds like a very old story that's been done over and over again. Since her mother's death, McCurdy has been able to create a life outside of her mother's control and finally feels free.
So something to know, in the United States, in terms of data on at least the involvement of government agencies, statistics show that the majority of child abuse is perpetrated by women. It's perpetrated, if it's one of the parents, it's perpetrated more by the mother than the father. And if it's fatal, 70% of children that are killed by one parent are killed by their mother. In terms of other people abusing children, it's more often a person who works in a caregiving capacity in a field that is usually dominated by women. And this is a lot of what gets done is it's easier to hide it. Most of the time when a man abuses a child, the child ends up with visible signs of abuse, bruising and, cuts and abrasions, sometimes broken bones and stuff like that. And it's quick and easy to determine that something terrible is happening and get the child out of the situation. And you have the mother saying, hey, this is happening, and people automatically believe her. But when the mother is the abuser, a lot of times the abuse is very invisible. She starves the child. The majority of children who are killed by abuse are killed through neglect, and they're usually under toddler age. The majority of deaths from abuse are infants, and they're infants that were neglected to death. So this kind of abuse is invisible. What McCurdy's mom did, that's all a sign of some very heavy mental disorders. Like, she was living vicariously through her daughter. She was clearly narcissistic. She clearly had her own eating disorder, or she wouldn't have imposed one on her daughter. And she was basically trying to make her daughter be what she didn't get to do. And anytime that you try to coercively control somebody's life, you're going to cause them damage. And this is what she was doing, coercive control, using a combination of, making McCurdy feel unattractive and unhealthy, using sexual abuse, using probably guilt tripping and everything else that goes along with coercive control. And then, she ended up basically ruining her whole childhood. And she's fortunate that she didn't die from this, because starvation damages your heart. My generation, our generation will remember Karen Carpenter, who died of a heart attack at, I think, like 35, because she had deprived her system of potassium so much for so long that she had permanent heart damage. And even after she recovered from her eating disorder, the damage that she had done to her body still killed her. So, I hope and pray for McCurdy's recovery, but this is something that in our society we need to be more aware of, because it's when people think of child abuse, the first thing that you hear from people indicates that it's the stereotype of the child beating, wife beating, patriarchal, evil overlord of the house, right? That's doing this. And a lot more often, it's more like the mom from the movie Carrie. Like, that's child abuse looks more like, it's not quite that dramatic, but child abuse is often more like that than the stereotype.
There are failed actor fathers who project their fallen Hollywood ambitions onto their sons. Macaulay Culkin's dad is one example. But just about every parent will adhere to the principle of, you're a growing boy. And it's true. It's practically impossible to feed too much calcium or carbs or protein to a growing child, because it all goes on the growing process. If a child becomes fat, it's almost always the result of too much sugar and not enough exercise, which seems a generally less likely outcome if they have fathers, present and active fathers in their lives, who will not just take them under their wing, but will thrust them into the real world and allow them to fall off the monkey bars and scuff their knees and so on. Pardon me for the stereotype, but it is broadly true. It takes a mother, particularly an overprotective mother, particularly an overprotective single mother, to conclude that the only way to keep their child's weight down is to starve them. Just let them play. A child who is let loose on a playground will get more exercise in 2 hours than a gym bro let loose in a gym for 2 weeks. Again, there are many mothers who do understand this, and there are many fathers who don't understand this. Lord knows there's no shortage of fathers who are overprotective of their daughters. So I guess the overarching message is, don't be any more protective of your daughters than you are with your sons. They are the same size as your sons and the same metabolism until the age of 12, give or take. Psychologically, they're very different from the earliest of ages, but there's no reason to overfeed boys and underfeed girls. That's just parents projecting their own neuroses onto the children that correspond to their own shortcomings. If you want to control their diet, do it when they're teenagers. Because when they're teenagers is when they run out of energy. They exercise less and they become fat. They become fat, blue-haired dumpster fires if they eat too much. Ironically, that is the worst possible time to let them indulge in the body positivity of fat acceptance. You don't hear about that story. You don't hear about the teenager who was neglected by their checked-out wine box drinking mother and became a feminist land whale with zero chance of ever becoming a successful actress or a successful anything, because they don't become a successful anything, and you never hear about them. There are invisible stories on all sides of the great story that is modern humanity. Swings and roundabouts. Eh? Some kids don't get to use the swings or the roundabouts. Some kids don't even want to use the swings or the roundabouts because of body acceptance or body unacceptance. Life is complicated, and then you die. Eh?
I guess the other thing I would add that I was just thinking about, which is kind of interesting, is that when people who worked on the show expressed concern that she was too thin, her mother reassured, no, she's fine, she's eating normally, and then told her to say the same, and no one thought to look into it. No one thought. It's almost like because the mom said it's okay, everyone just kind of accepted it, and they didn't, like, if he was raised by a dad and he was doing the same thing to her. By the way, where is dad? I haven't heard anything about him. But if she was, let's say, raised by a single father, and that father wanted to make her a star and everything, and he was doing the same, I think that people would start to, maybe they're more likely to question it, is what I'm saying. So if she said, no, everything's fine, and she's like starving because her mom is, or because the dad is like not feeding her as much or whatever, I think that they might actually be more likely to intervene or investigate, and they didn't. Now, this could also simply
I think I found a piece of the puzzle here, Brian.
Okay.
I looked at her wiki, and her father, Mark McCurdy, who worked 2 jobs, in her 20s, Jeanette learned her dad was not her biological father.
Oh.
So
there was
dad wasn't in the picture, period.
Yeah. And this other dad, was he in the picture much? Like, was he
That
divorced?
is literally the only mention of him in the entire Wikipedia.
Well, I can say one thing. In a lot of families, the step parent is like an extra on the set, not an actor in the scene. And it's, I like in my household, that's not the way things were. I mean, I was a really active parent with all of the kids, but a lot of times there is, especially if the step parent is the dad, the mom will have this attitude. And I know this from, I've been in a few step parenting groups that I've been involved in, actually several step parenting groups online. And this is a very common complaint among stepfathers, where the biological mother kind of, she wants him around when she can't handle things. And she wants him there to be the scapegoat, to be blamed when she does something wrong, but she doesn't want any advice, and his input doesn't get considered if she's, got her mind made up about something. And that may have been the case in this situation as well. He may have had very little to no say in the matter. And then the other thing is, there is this tendency among men in general, if they're in a situation where nothing's on fire and nobody's bleeding, that everything is okay, right? And if they didn't, like, if he didn't have any biological children of his own, he may have just convinced himself, because he loved his wife, that she knew what she was doing, and what she was doing was normal and the right thing to do, because the kid that she was doing it to wasn't his biological kid. And so he may have been, even if he was in the home, he may have been no help to her at all. because there may have been a little bit of willful blindness there. There may have been a little bit of it's not your business, you're not her father,
Right.
A whole bunch of different things, and like you just don't know. It's very different with a step parent than it is with a parent.
Yeah, let me ask this. Do you know if the stepdad, do you know if he always knew that that wasn't his kid? If they just kept it from her, like the daughter, or if the father or the stepdad learned that that wasn't his kid later and was operating under the assumption that it was? Like, you know what I mean?
All I know
like,
is that page I read from the Wikipedia, and the fact that the guy is in his late 50s now.
well, this girl's like 30 now, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's about right.
I'm just curious because, like, we don't know for sure, but what if he is supporting this family or was supporting this family under the presumption that he thought that was his kid? And
that's a possibility too.
I mean, it's possible, and that's like something that is kind of important. But even if that's not the case, the fact that she didn't learn that he wasn't her dad until, I guess, later in life, is also a bit concerning. I think that it's probably best that children know, where their parents are, and it's not kept from them. So.
Well, and I've personally known at least one dad who worked two full-time jobs, and at his wife was a stay-at-home mom, and he thought she was being a stay-at-home mom, taking care of the kids, doing her job, while he did his job and supported the family, right up until CPS came and took the kids for neglect. And it turns out that she was leaving them home alone. 7-year-old was taking care of the infant. Like that was a really rough situation, and he was pretty much oblivious because he was getting up, at 5 o'clock in the morning and going to work. And by the time he was home at night, most days, the kids were already in bed. So, he had no way of knowing what was going on, and it could have been a situation like that in this case as well.
Yep, it could have been. All right, well, we're gonna move on because we're a little past time now. So let us know what you guys think about this story in the comments. Like I said, full disclosure, this story of Jeanette McCurdy, it's old. It's from last year. But I didn't know about it, and I thought, we should probably at least touch on it a little bit, and just let us know what you guys think about this in the comments. So
it trended on Twitter the other day because there was a lot of reporting on it, because I guess she has a new show out that's actually called something like "I'm Glad My Mom's Dead" or something like that she's been doing, and it's apparently controversial. Can you imagine if the story was about her father, and her father had starved her and pushed her into acting and lived vicariously through her and done vaginal and breast exams frequently until she was 17 and all of that, and then she did a show called "I'm Glad My Father Is Dead." I don't think the same people will be complaining about that.
Yeah, no way. So, all right. Well, let us know what you guys think about this one in the comments section. We're going to move on to the last story. I know we talked a little bit. We did a show on this story yesterday, but I wanted to give Hannah, Mike, and Mike J an opportunity to give their thoughts on this. It's just that I picked it, and then Allison was like, "Let's talk about this," and I was like, "Oh, okay." So we're going to be talking about House of the Dragon. And how it's gonna be feminist, I guess. It's Game of Thrones with more feminism in it, because I think Game of Thrones is pretty feminist anyway. So, all right, Mike J, I'm gonna hand you the floor.
So, it's been over 3 years since the dust has settled on the ending of HBO's Game of Thrones. While the last season of the show was not very well received, HBO had planned spin-offs, and one such show will debut this fall. House of the Dragon will be a prequel to the original Thrones set hundreds of years beforehand.
House of the Kitchen.
All I'm saying is if they don't get the monkeys oh god, what's the song? House of the Rising Sun, but retool the lyrics a bit for this. They're wasting their fucking time. That being said, the show is set to focus on
You mean the animals?
Oh, the animals, not the
Yeah, I was saying wait a minute, that's not the monkeys.
It's literally one.
Well,
of the
they are
songs I
animals,
know
though.
from them.
Yeah.
So, the show is set to focus on the characters of Alicent Hightower and I tried to pronounce this 8 different times last night, and I think the best attempt is Rhaenyra Targaryen. 2 ladies of noble houses that come to blows over questions of succession after a lifetime of being friends. Something I'm going to state right now. I'm going to read 2 snippets from the actresses. These are only one of each of the actresses of the characters, because I guess the way they're doing this is, I don't know if it's going to be a cut back, cut forth, to and fro sort of thing, or they're just going to start out with one actress and then transition to the other. But each character is going to have 2 different actresses, because I guess what they're doing is oh, this is them when they were younger, this is them when they're older, so they switch actresses. And it's really interesting that these 2 statements I have here are actually from the younger actresses, who I guess started filming this when they were in their mid to late teens, and they're now both in their 20s, I want to say, early 20s. So just keep that in mind as I read these. The actress for Alicent Hightower, Emily Carey, says the show will focus on the relationship between the 2 characters, stating, quote, "It's sort of towing the line between platonic and romantic, just an all-consuming adoration and love for that one person. That's part of why they brought the characters in early, to show that love, which is what makes the demise of their friendship so much more heartbreaking," end quote. The actress for Rhaenyra Targaryen, Millie Alcock, says the show will focus on something unexpected, stating, quote, "House of the Dragon really creates a nuanced conversation of misogyny. We don't only explore it through a level of women being shut down and the patriarchy, but also go in depth about the internalized misogyny that women are constantly faced with, and the competitiveness. Alicent and Rhaenyra's relationship is at the forefront of that conversation," end quote. House of the Dragon will debut on August 21st on HBO.
I'm surprised we haven't done originally this yet. Come to think of it, as soon as Alicent can bring about the energy to do original this, we probably will do it, because we did one on that Lord of the Rings nonsense earlier on. But for all of George R.R. Martin's faults, by all accounts, he's pretty good at writing female characters. He doesn't just write flawless, superhuman women. Although that's how many of them were rendered in the final product. Thanks, HBO or where it was. He wrote downright tyrannically bitchy female characters who played active roles in the rise and fall of families ascending and descending to and fro the thrones in question. And he must have been really good at it, because throughout the tenure of the show, I don't remember ever hearing feminists complaining about the portrayal of women as flawed or nasty or downright evil. They complained about the scenes of women getting raped, sure, while they glossed over the scenes of men getting tortured and murdered, but that's to be expected. Showing a feminist, a scene of a woman getting raped is like showing a dog treat to a dog. There's no hoop they won't jump through to get to that dopamine truth. But for the most part, they were fine with women being portrayed as flawed yet noble, strong in one way and weak in another way, powerful yet not infinitely so. That probably contributed to the success of the show that was the Game of Thrones, right up until the final season, when they finally got hold of it and ruined everything. Yeah, they had a good run, though, all things considered, but just like the Lord of the Rings, the canon doesn't end at the point at which feminists ruin everything. It goes on to have a life after life, an afterlife. The original is always defined by feminists as misogyny, and the woke zombie corpse of a once beautiful series is a commentary on internalized misogyny. In other words, now there are women all over the fucking place, especially women of color, but it's still not good enough, because nothing can ever be good enough. Next, it'll be women in wheelchairs, then intersex persons in wheelchairs, then trans-disabled, religiously non-binary women in wheelchairs, then whatever man-made horror beyond our comprehension is yet to be discovered by the ever-moving over to the window of everlasting despair. I'm stopping now. I need a drink. I'm drunk. I need a drink.
It's all good as long as it doesn't actually like involve men. We can include all the identities we want, just not men. So, all right.
I got
Yes.
some things to say about this.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
Whew, Lordy. I'm of so many different minds on this. None of them are positive. I remember when I first watched Game of Thrones, I was living with this really strange couple in Texas, trying to help them build a house they were planning to probably flip to some illegal immigrants. And one of them at night was like, "Hey, you guys want to watch something cool?" Like, "Okay, what is it?" Like, Game of Thrones. Like, I've never heard of that in my life. Like, don't worry. Do you like boobs and beheadings? Like, yeah, those are cool. You'll love this show then. And they bring out like a modded Xbox that they have all the shows, well, like the first season, because that's all that was out at the point. And that's where I watched it, and I kind of got into it, and I enjoyed what it was for the moment. And of course, as things dragged on, it kind of got, well, it was weird. Game of Thrones had this really interesting evolution where it was like very slow, very methodical, very, very slow paced, but like clear they were building up to something. Then everything kind of rushed to a head, and then it started meandering a bit. And then like the last couple seasons happened, and they were tying everything up, and well, then last season happened, and I don't like to talk about it. So I was never like a huge fan, but I enjoyed, I thought it was a good way to spend an hour every other Sunday. And I think part of the fun of it was the fact of, at least in the very beginning, it was just unpredictable. People just fucking died. You think, oh, this guy, Edward Stark, he's gonna be the guy. He's gonna be the guy for the whole thing. And nope, he, spoilers, fucking dies at the end of season 1. Or was it even before the end of season?
No, it was right at the end, and we're talking about Sean Bean, which I think on some level we should have expected. He wasn't going to make it, since Sean Bean almost never makes it in anything.
They were going to buck the trend, man.
That was like a weird, like, really predictable subversion. Because well, first of all, and I don't mean to interrupt, I'm going to let you finish, but I knew that Sean Bean wasn't going to make it because he was too good He was like the purest
Yes.
guy on the show, and I was like, they're gonna kill this guy. And the fact that it's Sean Bean only makes it more likely, you know. But anyway, those are my thoughts. But go ahead.
But I think what made that original the original Game of Thrones such a fun show is not going to be here in this. Like immediately coming out and saying, "Oh, these two characters, they are going to be the main characters." Like, well, they're never going to fucking die. There's not going to be any contention. You know, people around them, I bet, are going to drop like flies. But both of these women really sound like they got some job security. I mean, you know, they could pull a hell of a bait and switch here, but I don't think they're going to. And the other thing too is like again, the hook that got me into this was a friend saying, "Hey man, boobs and beheadings," and them just saying, "Oh, this is going to be all about relationships." I don't know if you're paying attention, folks, but the one thing that is always the most blatant hat tip when a show is being written by women or progressives, it stops being about something that's fun and starts being about relationships.
Yeah, it turns into a soap opera. Like
exactly.
Yeah, that's literally. This is like almost every property, or it's like some weird like attempt at a slice of life thing, where it's like, oh, you know, let's see what happens when the fucking Harfoots go to the local cafe and try to order drinks. This is gonna be hilarious. You know, and there are orcs at the next table, and they're bullying them. You know, like that's the kind of shit they do. Like it always turns into a soap opera or a cringy slice of life thing.
Yeah,
like,
it becomes Seinfeld without the humor.
Yeah, Seinfeld, but not funny. And the there's no conflict. Like the conflict is what people want to see in anything, like a film or whatever, that there should be some kind of, you know, conflict or rising action. The action doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be. It could be like a courtroom drama, you know, where it's all like the tension keeps going up. Or it could be a card game, you know, like in Casino Royale. Like the most intense part about that movie, and I'm talking about the one with Daniel Craig, is the card game. Like that's so it's not, it doesn't have to be full of wall-to-wall action to be extremely engaging. But they don't like any of that, especially when there are stakes and there's like the threat of something, like you could be killed or you could be arrested or you could lose something, whatever. They generally don't like that. That's why like the comic book movies have all become extremely boring, like because there is no conflict anymore. It's just like I don't even know what they're doing because I don't watch it anymore.
Really,
but
I've got a crazy hot take on that. There were never ever any stakes in any Marvel movie.
Well, I
think about it. Think about it.
All right, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I
think that the early ones did, but I know they lost the plot, like probably about halfway through. And I think that I mean, like when we say stakes, is it the idea that, you know, the heroes might lose? Because
that the bad guy might win, that the world might actually be destroyed, that, you know, the evil plan may come to fruition.
Yeah, sure, but I mean,
the closest we ever got was, you know, was Endgame, and that's only because they paused halfway through the movie and then cut it into two different movies.
Yeah, but I guess so. But like, I think that if there's nothing wrong with telling a story that can be predictable in that regard, because you're telling a story of heroism, so there should be, you know, the good guys should win, right? Like I don't think that simply subverting that is necessarily like the most creative direction you could go.
No, not at all. But when you've told the same story 30 times in the past decade.
Well, yeah, but I think that's a product of oversaturation, but not necessarily that the base formula doesn't work, because, you know, when people go and watch a movie about anyone, it could be James Bond, it could be, Indiana Jones, we want to see him come out on top. Like, that's what we want. And of course he will, because he's the hero of the story, but none of that takes anything away from the story to begin with, in my opinion. But like, I think that you can, even though in some meta sense, most adults that are watching this stuff know that everything's going to turn out fine, but it can still be fun to see how things unfold, especially if the writers are good enough at making you think, how are they going to get out of this? And then they do it in a way that is, well done. Like, I don't like the solution that they did for Endgame with the time travel and all that. I thought that was lazy. I had tons of problems with that. So that's not a good example. But if it's like, there are plenty of good examples out there that you can find. And I think that, I guess, like, I can understand your position on the stakes. But I don't know if simply because the good guys are expected to win, that necessarily, takes anything away from that. Because you could like make the same argument for, Batman movies and Superman movies and basically any genre that has to use a final conflict in order to resolve, and basically bring order back to chaos as it was sort of like built up within the film. So I don't know if like, I'm not accusing you of that either, but I'm just saying, like, I don't know if I agree with that notion of the stakes. I think there is a way to do it well. So, but
I think that's the big point. There's a way to do it well, and there's a way not to, and I don't think Marvel has for the longest time.
Yeah. I won't disagree with that. I think that especially in the last 5-6 years,
I don't think very many modern creators have for the longest time. I think a lot of it is they are so focused on ticking off boxes. We have to do this, we have to do that, we have to have this, we have to have that. And then there's the Hollywood formula. You have to tell the story this way because there were some stories that were told this way in the 80s that were really, really successful. So we got to repeat this over and over and over again. Like, those things have detracted significantly from new media creation, entertainment media creation, probably for at least the last 20 years. And there's been some great stuff, but I think the majority of what has come out of Hollywood in particular and television studios in the United States has just been absolute garbage. And I hate to be grouchy about that, but that's pretty much the way I feel about it. Like, we haven't paid for cable the whole time that we've been married. My husband and we watch other things. We don't watch cable. We don't really pay for services. We don't find things that are worth paying for there, like, and it's sad because the capacity for creativity in the human psyche is immense. It's unfathomable, and it's very stifled by the sort of factory methods that get used in these sort of systems of creation.
Right.
And I guess my point in all of this is I would love to see more independent creation and less, not to be down on corporate stuff, but when they get to the point where you have to use a formula and you have to tick all the political correctness boxes and so on, you lose the creative process entirely.
Yeah, you're gonna end up with a soulless product, and I agree with that, because it's all being produced by committee, and they're all just, like you said, they're just putting in what they're told should be in it, because that would essentially gratify the widest possible audience, or at least that's the theory. And it doesn't matter if the product is mediocre, And the thing is that like most people, I think they're either just blind consumers and they're just gonna watch whatever is put in front of them, and they're gonna figure out, they're gonna post hoc rationalize and cope with regards to like trying to justify watching it, or they're just gonna reject it outright and they are gonna seek their entertainment elsewhere, either by looking to independent or looking to the past. Like they might go and look at older films that were made with more passion and heart. And but yeah, so
you know, and in all honesty, like, and it's not like there hasn't always been a factory process for Hollywood. If you look at old films, you'll see. But the difference is they weren't trying to tick a bunch of PC boxes that detracted from the story. The boxes that they were ticking, like the patriotism boxes and everything, they still had to incorporate that into great storytelling. And they didn't try to make, like, there were some formulaic things with movies. If you look at John Wayne movies, for instance, he made like 200 some movies, and a significant portion of them were he played the same character in different movies, but they were still great movies. They still had compelling stories. They still had compelling characters. The characters were realistic. They were flawed. You know, you had the plot lines involved conflict that was identifiable. You know, something that people could understand, and a lot of that's been taken away. You can't have those things anymore.
Yeah, and there is a big problem with political correctness and how that's made it nearly impossible to explore themes that much older films did really, really well. But okay, so anyways, we should end the show because it's 8 and I gotta pick up my wife in an hour. So let us know what you guys think about this. Are you going to watch House of the Dragon? You know, do you have any concerns about this sort of suggested feminism? I know that a lot of like
one last thing real quick. I did look into it. Apparently George R.R. Martin is not involved in this at all.
Well, that was another thing that I
apparently gave like the thumbs up to whoever's writing this, and that's about it.
Yeah, I heard that too, which, you know, I don't know. I assume, because I've heard that this spin-off or prequel is based on some books that he wrote, so it's not like it's coming from nowhere.
It's based on a book that I think, if I got this right, one of the characters literally appears in like one sentence, and the other character, it focuses more on her later in life, and this is going to be focusing heavily on her like as a child and as like a teenager.
It's like their relationship when they were young, and then their relationship now, where they're more like opposed to each other. It sounds like a story that's been told, or that's nothing wrong with that if you can do it well. You know, I'm reminded of The Count of Monte Cristo has some of that in it, and I think The Count of Monte Cristo is an amazing story. So if they can pull it off well, then yeah, you know, but I'm not holding my breath. All right, so unless, of course, because this is a Warner Brothers product, right? I believe Game of Thrones, yeah, because it's on HBO and HBO is owned by Warner Brothers. Maybe that guy will, like, you know, come in and clean house on this. The guy who's been going through all the DC properties and throwing them out left, right, and center. maybe they'll bring him in to other HBO properties and be like, no, this is out. I guess we'll see. So anyway, let us know what you guys think about this in the comments. I look forward to your thoughts. And we are now going to head into the patron show and just sort of hang out and chit chat about things. If you guys like this video, please smash like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you guys think about what we discussed on the news show today. And most importantly, please share this video because sharing is caring. Thank you, Hannah, Mike, and Randomcam for coming on. Thank you guys for joining us and watching today's show. And we will talk to you all in the next video.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.